Hey guys, tonight we're digging through the cluttered pockets, pouches, and shoulder-slung sacks of medieval folks, because yes, even in the Middle Ages, people had grab-and-go essentials. Picture it, the year is 1274. The dawn mist hugs the thatched rooftops, chickens are already screaming, a dog's licking something unidentifiable near a well, and you're stumbling out of a wooden doorway, wool tunic half-buttoned, clutching your must-haves for the day. Spoiler alert, if you think you'd survive without protein bars and phone chargers, you probably won't make it past second breakfast. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Post your location and local time. Belay. Love seeing where you're all tuning in from now. Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're a peasant. Not a glamorous one. Your house smells vaguely of turnips and mold. You've got places to be, which means grabbing food that won't rot by noon. First, you reach for a chunk of yesterday's rye bread, dense as a brick, and just as forgiving. No slices here. You'll tear off hunks with your teeth, like the half-starved animal you are. If you're lucky, there's a wheel of cheese in the corner. Well, wheel is generous, it's more like a wedge the rats haven't found yet. And onions. Oh yes. You tie one around your belt with a loop of twine. A raw, stinking bulb of sulfur that doubles as food and bug repellent. You aren't packing a meal. You're assembling a medieval survival kit. Sometimes there's meat left over, rabbit, maybe salted fish, but usually not. Most mornings, it's dry bread and vegetables. The kind that crunch like sorrow. You wrap it all in an old cloth and stuff it into a shoulder satchel made of rough linen or stitched animal hide. No Tupperware, no fancy beeswax wraps. Just a bag you've patched 4 times this month, your drink. Not water or you trying to die. You fill a leather flask with ale or weak cider. Water is for livestock and people who enjoy dysentery. Ale's safer, mildly nutritious, and numbs the taste of whatever you're chewing. Some folks carry a bit more. A knife, for example, tied to your belt. It's for cutting bread, defending your cow from wolves, and occasionally threatening the guy who keeps borrowing your firewood. There's also your spoon if you have one. Wooden whittled by your grandfather, and probably tastes like every stew it's ever touched. And shoes, let's not pretend they're comfortable. You slip into cracked leather clogs or rope sandals, depending on whether you live in mud or rocks today. Inside one of them, a folded piece of cloth wrapped around a coin or two, if you're lucky enough to have any. This is your emergency stash. Not for spending, for bribing, or praying, or escaping. Historians still argue whether peasants truly owned personal items or whether everything belonged to the family unit. But certain objects like the bread, the flask, the pouch of garlic, cloves often, had a distinctly individual, almost ritual feel. One fringe detail often overlooked, the good luck charms. A carved wooden bird. A small cross tied to a string. A stone with a hole through it. These aren't just trinkets, they're psychological armor. You wear them around your neck, tuck them into your shoe, or sew them into your tunic hem. That rock might have once stopped a plague, or at least that's what your aunt swears. And then there's the cloth cap. Oh, the cap. It's not stylish, it's not even comfortable. But it keeps lice out of your hair and sun off your ears. You pull it over your head and feel, somehow, marginally more ready to face the roosters, the market crowds, and the Lord's tax collector. Your outfit doesn't have pockets, by the way. Pockets weren't really a thing yet. So everything dangles off your belt, over your back, or down your front. It jingles and flaps when you move. You sound like a walking tool shed. By the time you leave the house, you're a patchwork of wool, leather, and onions. You smell like earth, and salt and panic. You pass other peasants, who nod politely. Each of them similarly bundled in edible, drinkable, vaguely magical supplies. Some carry extra bread to trade at the market. Some tuck medicinal herbs behind their ears or in tiny pouches. Yarrow or plantain leaves, believed to stop bleeding and ward off tooth demons. Yes, that was a thing. Others haul bundles of kindling on their backs, or baskets woven from rushes containing eggs, snails, or a particularly vocal duck. And yes, your satchel might also include something, less edible, like a message, a note, written in charcoal on rough parchment, folded into a twist of cloth. Maybe you're delivering it to the miller. Maybe to the parish priest. Maybe you can't read it at all. It could be a love letter, a tax record, or an insult, but it feels important. Before you've even walked a mile, you're already chewing on bread that tastes like regret, wiping ale off your chin, and adjusting the strap that keeps cutting into your shoulder. You'll do this again tomorrow, and the next day, because in medieval times, grab and go wasn't a convenience, it was a lifeline. You're on the road now, well, more like a dirt track lined with slippery rocks and the occasional confused sheep. You're not heading to market, or to war, you're a pilgrim. And not because you're terribly devout, but because you heard. There's a shrine 3 towns over, where miracles supposedly happen and the inn has decent boiled eggs. As you walk, you start to realize that half the journey is about being seen, because yes, you've got food and a change of socks. But what really catches the eye are the badges. Tiny metal souvenirs, pinned all over your cloak. You've got one shaped like a scallop shell, the symbol of St. James. Another is a crude rendering of a saint's face that, frankly, looks more like a surprised goat. There's one you think is a bishop's hat, but it might be a turnip. Doesn't matter. The more you have, the better. These pewter tokens are mass-produced, cheap, and wildly collectible. Medieval flair, basically. A bit of personality to spice up the otherwise bland, sackcloth-heavy fashion sense of the average traveler. You see others like you, shimmering like badly decorated Christmas trees. You nod in appreciation. It's a silent contest, who's been to the most holy sites without dying or losing all their toes. Your bag clinks from more than just ale flasks. You're also carrying tiny vials filled with holy water, though, if we're being honest, it's 90% stream runoff and 10% hope. There's also a tiny wax candle, because if you do reach the shrine, you'll need something to light. Plus, candles double as hand warmers and emergency torches when your only other option is panicking in the dark. One particularly devout woman you pass has a sandal tied to her waist. Not her sandal, someone else's. She says it belonged to a hermit who cured foot pain. Historians still argue whether these kinds of relics were actually believed to hold power or just served as quirky social currency. Either way, she guards it like it's the crown jewels, and you've got your own secret treasure. A dried flower, pressed into a booklet of psalms. You took it from a church garden 2 summers ago. Sometimes you sniff it when you feel particularly homesick. Smells like dust now. Somewhere on your cloak is a little badge shaped like a phallus with wings. Yes, those existed. Called festina. They were meant to ward off evil spirits, and maybe entertain your fellow travelers. You don't really show. Its hit's tucked under the edge of your hood, but you feel a bit safer, knowing it's there. Bobbing quietly as you walk, your belt pouch holds strange treasures. A crust of honeycomb you can suck on. A scrap of silk, given by a noblewoman who once saw you pray very dramatically. A bone comb you share with 3 others, because lice are a community experience. Along the path, merchants sell more trinkets. Badges, yes, but also fake relics. Slivers of the true cross. Or glass beads, supposedly from the Holy Land. One man tries to convince you that his bottle contains the Virgin's breath. You pass. You're not that gullible. Still, you do buy a pin of St. Christopher, Protector of Travelers. It costs you half a copper coin, and comes with a wink from the merchant. He throws in a scrap of parchment with a crude prayer written in Latin. You can't read it, but it looks impressive, and that's most of the point. As night falls, you stop at a roadside hostel, a kind of medieval Airbnb, with hay for bedding and stew that's mostly turnip water. Everyone strips off their outer layers and reveals the full extent of their trinket collections. One man's got a flask labeled Blood of St. Edmund, which he guards more closely than his shoes. Another reveals a small carving of a saint, with movable limbs. It dances a little when he shakes it. For luck, he says. And then there's you scratching at your neck, where a pin keeps stabbing you. Sipping from your holy water turned mud water flask, and wondering how long it'll take before your miracle happens. Pilgrimage is, more often than not, just long, uncomfortable walking. But the things you carry, the feather from a holy dove, the badge from the shrine you visited last spring, a small folded paper with your mother's handwriting, all these become your story. They rattle softly when you walk, and sometimes, when the path is empty and the moon is high, you swear, they whisper. You smell him before you see him. Leather oil, rosewater, and the faint stink of old horse. He's a knight, or at least dressed like one, and he's perched atop a massive destrier that looks like it could bite through your spine without chewing. You step aside quickly, because unlike peasants or pilgrims, knights carry their lives in style. You glance at his saddlebags, and they're not bulging with onions and stale cheese. Oh no, he's got accoutrements. Carefully rolled. Linen shirts, a silver-gilded grooming set, maybe even a tiny travel chessboard with pieces carved from ivory or mother-of-pearl. A servant follows a few paces behind, balancing what appears to be a carved wooden stool and a rolled-up tapestry. You blink. Yes, he's traveling with interior decoration. If you were hoping for rugged utility, prepare for disappointment. Knights on the move brought privilege with them, sometimes in the form of perfume bottles tied with ribbon, other times with sealed letters from monarchs and popes. These weren't just status symbols, they were passports to comfort. One pouch at the knight's side likely holds wax and a personal seal, because when you're in the business of conquest or diplomacy, sealing letters with a blob of wax shaped like your family crest is the medieval equivalent of posting on LinkedIn inside another compartment. A dagger. Not for combat, it's too fancy. This one's for cutting roasted pheasant or trimming his beard into a chiseled smirk. You notice the hilt, polished bone inlaid with jet, probably engraved with something meaningful like strength through blood or don't touch my cheese. Historians still argue whether knights routinely carried such luxurious goods on campaign or whether these tales were embellished later to romanticize feudal warlords. But we do know that many knights went to absurd lengths to preserve appearances, even in the middle of bloody skirmishes. Some even packed parchment scrolls with poetry. Yes, poetry. Imagine galloping into battle with a dagger in one hand and a love sonnet in your saddlebag. That's range. As the knight trots by, his belt clinks with more than armor. He wears a tiny reliquary case, maybe, holding a scrap of a saint's robe or a vial of dust from a holy site. It's less about faith and more about divine insurance. You never know when a battlefield needs a miracle. He also carries a traveling cup, silver, collapsible, and etched with lions. Because gods forbid, a man of chivalry drinks from a communal wooden ladle, like a filthy commoner. You later glimpse him at a wayside encampment, seated on that absurd stool, enjoying a supper of roast capon while sipping spiced wine from a goblet. His servant reads aloud from a scroll, something about honor and destiny and thighs, glistening in moonlight. You nibble your onion in silence, one of the knight's more practical accessories. A waxed cloak that doubles as a tent flap. Useful, but still much. His boots knee-high, polished, probably cost more than your village's entire annual yield of oats. And they never touch mud if his squire can help it. There's talk that knights even brought their own latrine seats. Portable ones, wooden frames, padded with wool, covered in embroidered cloth. Because if you're going to poop outdoors, why not do it like royalty? Again, historians debate how common this was, but a few surviving illustrations suggest that yes, some knights literally had traveling thrones. You hear someone nearby joke, you can take a man to battle, but you can't take the cord out of his backside. Still, it's not all fluff. Hidden under the glint and polish, a knight's kit includes more deadly tools. A small vial of quicklime, maybe for blinding enemies. A whetstone for his sword. A sling pouch for a war horn. Or a signal flag. These practical objects ride silently alongside his more pompous possessions. But even so, the overall aesthetic is clear. Intimidation, elegance, and the faintest whiff of rosewater. That night, while you huddle near the fire eating barley gruel, the knight's tent glows from within, lit by an oil lamp hanging from a miniature brass hook. You see his silhouette reclining, perhaps dictating something dramatic to a squire. He laughs, and outside, on the edge of the world, you clutch your bread crust and whisper a quiet, "Must be nice." Your back aches, your boots squished with questionable moisture, and you've just stepped in something that may or may not have once been food. Welcome to your life as a medieval commoner. But before you complain too loudly, check your belt. Still got your pouch. It's not much. Just a worn leather sack tied tight with string, swinging from your waist like a lazy pendulum. It doesn't look impressive, but this little pouch holds your entire mobile life. First, there's the animal fat. Sounds appetizing, right? A small ball of lard wrapped in cloth. You smear it on dry hands, rub it into sore knees, or if you're feeling fancy, use it as hair gel. It smells like a barn fire and feels like regret, but it works. On really cold days, it even doubles as emergency calories. Then, there are seeds. Mustard, fennel, maybe some coriander if you're lucky. You chew them to freshen your breath, grind them into paste for poultices, or chuck them into boiling water to disguise the taste of swamp stew. Nobody says thank you, but you know the pot would taste like old socks without your seasoning game tucked. Next to those, your charm. Every peasant has one. Yours is a small bone carved with a symbol. Your grandmother swore was older than dirt. She told you it keeps away fevers. Or demons. Or both. You never quite understood her accent. You've dropped it a few times, but somehow, it always ends up back in your pouch. Some people carry little crosses made from ash wood, or beetle shells strung onto threads. One man you know walks around with a dead frog sewn inside his pouch. He says it cures headaches. You've stopped asking questions. Now reach a little deeper, and you'll find something sticky. That's your mystery goo. A dark resinous blob you scraped from the edge of a pine tree last summer. You've been meaning to use it for something glue, maybe. But mostly it just sticks to everything else in the pouch, and gives off a weird, minty rotten smell that never quite leaves your fingers. Historians still argue whether these daily carry pouches were standardized, or if they varied wildly based on region, trade, and family tradition. One thing's certain, their contents say more about a person than any record ever could. A baker might carry crushed charcoal to brush his teeth. Even in the Middle Ages, people worried about morning breath. A shepherd might tuck away a tuft of wool soaked in sheep's milk to chew on during long walks, and a miller might carry, well, flour everywhere. Even in his eyebrows, you shuffle past a roadside shrine and pause to fish out a copper coin. It's bent, possibly fake, but you drop it into the offering box anyway. You do it not because you're devout, but because the last time you passed a shrine without paying respects, your donkey bit a priest and your roof caved in. Coincidence? You're not taking chances. Back in your pouch, you keep a soft scrap of linen. It was once part of your mother's apron. Now it's your nose wiper, bandage, and on special occasions, your napkin. It smells like home and onions, mostly onions. You pull out your knife, not the eating one, but the small utility blade you use to cut kindling, trim your nails, and occasionally dig splinters out of your palm. Its edge is dull, its handle cracked, and it's still one of the most valuable things you own. Every now and then, you meet someone whose pouch is clearly, ambitious. Stuffed to the seams with feathers, shells, beetles, teeth, and folded herbs. There's a woman in the next village who claims she carries an entire recipe for an anti-witch potion, just in her pouch. She never opens it though. Too sacred, she says. You suspect it's just full of lint and sass. What do you keep for luck? Some folks tie a red string around a chicken bone. Others swear by tiny mirrors sewn into their tunic hems. You carry a single silver button. Found it in the mud 2 years ago. Doesn't match anything you own, but you polish it once a week and keep it near the charm bone. It glints like a secret. And while your pouch weighs only a few ounces, it represents a full-on utility belt of survival in a world where the next village over might have plague, or bandits, or just terribly salted stew. By the time the sun sets, your pouch has been opened and closed a dozen times. Each time, it releases that signature aroma, rich bouquet of pine, salt, lard, and mystery. You've stopped noticing, but others haven't. A passing monk actually recoiled earlier. Still, it swings with you faithfully, tied tight to your belt, unassuming, frayed, slightly sticky. But yours, And when you curl up on a bed of straw, cloak, pulled over your head, your hand drifts instinctively to it, feeling for the familiar lumpy shapes dot your own tiny world, dangling right at your hip. The road bends uphill now, and you trudge past a row of cloaked figures chanting under their breath. Monks. You recognize them instantly by their robes plain, undyed wool cinched with rope. Their heads are shaved into tonsures, their sandals are caked with mud, and they walk with that solemn expression that says they've thought about mortality since breakfast. But take a closer look. Every monk has something tied to his belt. Not a pouch of lard or onion loops like the peasants. No. Monks travel light, but meaningful. You spot the glint of a small, leather-bound book. Not full-sized, mind you, these are pocket psalters. Miniature Bibles that could fit in a single palm. Their pages delicate as moth wings. They dangle from cords, worn and warped by fingers tracing familiar verses again and again. One monk's psalter is wrapped in oilcloth, tied with a strip of ribbon likely cut from an altar cloth. Another has his tucked into a flap in his robe. The leather so softened it looks more like cloth than binding. And no, they're not just for praying. These books are mnemonic anchors. Monks memorize scripture by heart, and the tiny books serve as a kind of flashcard deck. If you've peeked over one shoulder, you'd likely see marginal note-steiny illustrations of beasts or saints scribbled in ink. But it's not just books. You also spot beads, prayer beads carved from wood or bone, sometimes even nuts, strung together. With twine, some monks finger them as they walk, a bead for each verse, each sin, each remembered name. The more beads, the longer the walk, and the heavier the conscience. Historians still argue whether monks always carried psalters in prayer, beads while traveling, or whether these were reserved for more prestigious orders. The truth probably varied by monastery and by monk. Some were deeply devout. Others liked a nap and a good cheese wheel as much as the next guy. You walk a bit alongside. One monk whose hood slips back to reveal ink stains on his fingers. He's been copying manuscripts. You can tell by the way he holds his hands' thumbs curled inward to avoid smudging. From under his robe, you catch a glimpse of a small knife, not for fighting, but for scraping errors from parchment. It's a scribe's tool. He hums a tune, one you vaguely recognize from a mass years ago. And in his pouch there's a twist of rosemary, likely taken from the cloister garden. You ask if he uses it for headaches. He shrugs and says it just smells like the abbey. You can't help but notice something odd tied to his waist. A carved wooden fish. Small, flat, with a tiny hole through its center. He says nothing about it. You don't ask. Another monk trailing behind carries a cloth-wrapped loaf and a flask. But instead of ale, it's water. He's fasting. He nods politely, but doesn't speak. You've heard some orders take vows of silence, though you suspect this one just doesn't want to talk to you. Then, trailing behind all of them, is the pack. Donkey, poor thing. Laden with a sack of extra robes, scrolls wrapped in wax cloth, and jars sealed with wax. One of them cracks open when it stumbles. A pungent wave of vinegar and crushed herbs spills into the dirt. You're told it's a monastery remedy. Smells like foot rot and pickles. Back near the front, the monk with the fish charm finally speaks. He tells you about a relic piece of the true cross wrapped in linen, which the abbot carries, tucked inside his sleeve. You blink. He grins. Is it real? Only the abbot knows, he says. The group stops to pray at a wayside cross. You hang back, watching as they lower their heads in perfect unison. One draws a circle in the dirt. Another tucks his psalter back into his robe, like a sacred secret. And then, as quickly as they stopped, they rise and continue, quiet, steady, like ghosts with sandals. You fall behind, but for the rest of the day, you hear echoes of their murmurs. In the breeze, snatches of Latin, bits of remembered verses, words you don't understand, but feel anyway, soft, steady, grounding. They carry so little, and yet somehow, so much. You catch the scent before you see the contraband, a sharp, exotic tickle in the air that doesn't belong in this muddy patch of Europe. Clove, faint but unmistakable. It's the medieval equivalent of walking past someone wearing designer cologne in a gas station. You follow your nose and find a woman crouched beside a cart. her fingers deftly tying a cloth bundle closed. Inside, dried herbs, crumbled saffron threads, and tiny wrinkled objects that look suspiciously like poppy pods. She notices your stare and grins without showing teeth. "Not for cooking," she says. Too quickly. "Welcome to the murky world of traveling spices. Herbs and, let's be honest, occasional illegal goods. You've seen the bundles before. Travelers. Carrying spice kits wrapped in cloth, tied to belts, tucked into boots. They're not just seasoning the local turnip slop. They're carrying wealth, medicine, and in some cases, portable social power. A single pinch of saffron could buy you a week's worth of eggs. Dried cloves are so rare they're often locked in chests. And poppy, well, depending on where you are, that's either a painkiller or something that gets you flogged. Maybe both." Historians still argue whether most peasants had access to such ingredients or whether these aromatic treasures were confined to upper-class kitchens and merchant stalls. The evidence is patchy. But we know one thing for sure: spices traveled, and people got creative. You sit beside a tanner later, that day his hands permanently dyed, a kind of purplish gray from his trade. He opens his pouch and offers you something, wrapped in parchment. Inside is dried rosemary mixed with black salt. "For the stew," he says. Then, winking, adds, "or the sores." You're not sure which sores he means. You decide not to ask. Some herbs are practical, meant to chew for breath, time for digestion. But others get shady. There's a woman in the market selling crushed mandrake root, says it helps with childbirth and curses. Her stall also offers blessed camphor, wrapped in silk. You're 75% sure it's just scented lard, but people buy it anyway. And then there's the stuff no one talks about. You hear whispers of travelers carrying powders that numb the gums, liquids that make you sleep for 2 days, or pastes rubbed on arrows to ensure they fly with purpose. One merchant rolls past you with a rickety wagon lined in fragrant burlap, cinnamon, cardamom, peppercorns. You catch glimpses through the slat-steiny pouches labeled with hand-scribbled runes. He sells mostly to nobles, but every so often, he slips a bundle to a stable boy with a knowing nod. You reach into your own satchel and feel for your tiny stash. It's modest dried marjoram, a twist of lavender, a single clove you've been saving for months. You don't use them much, just carry them, for luck, for comfort, for the faint memory of something richer than cabbage soup. One night, while sleeping under a cart, you're awoken by a heated argument near a campfire. 2 men bicker over a bag of nutmeg. One swears it's worth a silver coin, the other claims it's sawdust, soaked in perfume. They both might be right. Later you hear that a town 2 days from here just outlawed suspicious herb bundles. Rumors say someone poisoned a bishop's soup. Others claim he just had indigestion. Either way, sellers now hide their wares deeper. Inside hollowed bread loaves, sewn into shirt linings, even hidden in children's dolls. One peddler you meet wears a pouch around his neck, flat and stiff. Inside is a pressed leaf from a fig tree, wrapped in vellum. He says he got it in Venice. You don't believe him, but it smells too good to argue. Even churchmen get involved. You pass a priest, who pauses to adjust his robes and, in doing so, releases a brief puff of rose and myrrh. He notices your raised brow, and mutters something about cleansing the sin from the air. You suspect he just doesn't want to smell the sheep by the time night falls. The scent of spice and herb lingers everywhere, woven into cloaks, tucked behind ears, smeared on boots to mask rot and rain. They're more than just smells. They're power. Proof that the world is wide, and some people carry pieces of it tied to their belts, like treasures. And as you curl up in the hay, clove nestled under your tongue like a tiny, burning wish, you understand, in a world of muck and repetition, taste and smell are rebellion. A reminder that there's more than mud and barley gruel waiting out there. You're woken by the sound of metal scraping bone, or at least that's what it sounds like. You blink into the pale morning haze and spot a figure crouched by the fire, drawing a blade across a curved strip of horn. A barber surgeon, you realize. His apron is stained, his tools gleaming in the firelight. He's not alone. A tanner joins him. hands forever dyed that unnatural brown from months spent in vats of urine and lime. The two of them trade quiet jokes, while organizing their instruments feels like the wrong word. Let's just call it smelly portable chaos. Mobile tradesmen like these carry their entire livelihood in a bundle, pouch, or wooden case strapped to their back. Their grab-and-go kits aren't neat or charming. They're disturbing little treasure troves of function, grit, and occasional horror. You wander closer just out of curiosity, not because you enjoy night. The tanner offers you a sniff of his prized concoction, a bladder of liquid lye. It burns your nose before you're even halfway close. He grins like he's shared something intimate. Barbers in the medieval world did more than trim beards. They lanced boils, pulled teeth, stitched wounds, and occasionally doubled as amateur therapists. You see one roll out a leather wrap filled with sharp implements, knives, forceps, tiny hooks, even a cup for bloodletting. It clinks like a deadly music box, tucked beside the tools. A pig's foot, you don't ask, but your eyes ask everything he notices. Practice, he says, slicing a thin line along the skin. Good texture. Historians still argue whether such tools were carried daily or only brought out for scheduled fairs and village visits. But enough accounts exist to suggest these wandering fixers were always somewhat ready for impromptu surgeries or, at the very least, a suspiciously timed shave. The tanner unrolls a different bundle scraps of hide, bone needles, and rough twine. His fingers are quick, stitching something you can't quite recognize. Maybe a glove, maybe a pouch, maybe a rudimentary leather sock for someone with one particularly cold toe. He shows you his prized tool, a long wooden paddle with a row of embedded flint chips. It's used for softening hides, also probably effective in bar fights. Then there's the smell. Oh, the smell. You try to describe it in your mind. A mix of vinegar, spoiled broth, and the tears of every sheep that's ever met a vat. It clings to the tanner's coat, his tools, even his dog. You see a child run by with a bleeding knee. The barber steps forward, pulling a jar from his satchel, something thick and greenish that smells like old garlic. He smears it on the cut, ties it with a scrap of cloth, and hands the child a walnut. A fee or a bribe? Hard to say. There's also the barber's obsession with teeth. You watch him roll a tooth out of a cloth, a molar, blackened at the root. He says it came from a bishop. Then he laughs. You still don't know if he's serious. A lesser-known fact. Some barbers carried song sheets. After all, pain distracted by music is pain half endured. One even pulls a flute from his coat and plays a reedy tune while preparing a poultice. It's not good music, but it helps the mood. Slightly later, that day, you travel with them toward the next village. The barber rides a cart with his tools wrapped tightly in waxed cloth, tied with red cord, red for health, red for blood, red for warning. The tanner walks alongside, carrying a sack full of softened hides and muttering about a pigskin shortage. You ask them how often they clean their tools. The barber just shrugs. After they stop working, comforting, they stop once to help a woman with a toothache. The barber rubs her gum with poppy syrup, counts to 3 possibly in the wrong order, and yanks. The scream echoes through the trees. The tanner claps. The woman spits blood and hands over a dried apple. Payment received. These men aren't loved, exactly, but they're needed. Their kits, chaotic and unsanitary as they are, hold the difference between agony and a fighting chance. That night, around the fire, the barber sharpens his blades while humming a hymn. The tanner oils his tools and tells you he once tanned leather using dog poop and sage. You stare at him. He nods, perfectly serious. And as you pull your cloak tighter around your shoulders and try to ignore the scent of warm lye wafting from their kits, you realize something. These aren't just tradesmen. They're the backbone of medieval adaptable, and just unhinged enough to get the job done. By the time you make it to the edge of the next hamlet, the sun is sliding down the sky like melting wax. You're tired, your knees pop with every step, and your satchel smells increasingly like regret, but something catches your eye near the edge of the road. A woman, middle-aged, sharp-eyed, and muttering to herself, is crouched in the grass. She's burying something. Curiosity pulls you closer, cautiously. She glances up once, just enough to let you know you've been shined, but says nothing. She finishes her little ritual with a flat rock placed precisely over the buried object. Then she stands, dusts her apron, and walks off without a word. Later, as the fire crackles and others drift to sleep, someone tells you what you saw. A witch bottle. No, not proof of witchcraft, more like protection against it. Though the line is razor thin, and depending on who's doing the talking, those bottles could be either blessing or curse. They were usually made of clay or glass, filled with all sorts of troubling items: nails, needles, hair clippings, bits of bone, and sometimes, yes, really urine. The idea was to trap malevolent spirits or redirect curses. The belief was that if something nasty came sniffing around your soul, it'd get caught up in the sharp edges and bodily muck, stuck forever inside a tiny, terrifying prison. Historians still argue whether these bottles were used widely, or just among fringe folk in specific regions, but their physical remnants have shown up in surprising places: beneath doorways, buried in fields, even hidden inside chimneys. And they weren't the only strange keepsakes people tucked away in pouches or stitched into seams. You meet a young shepherd boy the next morning, barefoot and chewing a straw stalk. Hanging from his neck is a tiny cloth bundle, nothing fancy. He opens it, proudly displaying a few hairs tied with red thread. His mother's, he says. For safety, hair was powerful in medieval lore. Yours, your enemy's, your child's hair was like a signature to the invisible world. Sorcerers or wise women, depending on who's asking, might gather it for potions, bindings, or hexes. Which is why plenty of folks carried hair charms like armor. Sometimes their own, sometimes from someone they loved. You remember that odd coin sewn into your tunic hem. Now you wonder if it's more than just emergency money. Later that day, you pass a man at the roadside sharpening his blade. His belt holds a flask, a pouch, and unmistakably a rabbit's foot. He sees you looking and smirks. She brings luck, he says. Then he spits into the dust for good measure. You ask how it works. He shrugs. You carry her, you don't die. Simple logic. Difficult to disprove. In the next village, an old widow displays a woven charm outside her door. Dried herbs bound with twine into a sort of humanoid shape. It's facing away from the house. You ask her why. She tells you it's meant to watch the road for evil. Is it a scarecrow, you ask? She shakes her head. It's a warning. You back away respectfully. One peddler shows you something truly strange: an iron nail curved at both ends, wrapped in black cloth and sealed with wax. A traveler gave it to me, he says. Said it saved him from a fever that killed a whole village. You can't tell if it's genuine belief, a sales pitch, or both. Even priests get superstitious when they think no one's watching. You hear one mutter a charm under his breath before stepping onto a cracked floorboard. Another dips his fingers into a small pouch tied at his waist, then presses the contents to his lips, a habit that might be prayer or just fear. There's no formal ritual, no universal symbol. These protections, these odd cobbled-together defenses against a hostile universe, are deeply personal. A sliver of a saint's robe, a coin rubbed smooth from decades of handling, a bone carved into a spiral. One traveler confides that he carries a single black feather found on the doorstep the night his fever broke. He doesn't know what bird it came from, but he keeps it wrapped in wool, hidden in his boot, and whispers thanks to it every night. These charms aren't pretty. They're not blessed by the church. Some are frankly unpleasant to think about, but they represent the medieval version of hope, tactile, hidden, and carried close. Because, when you believe the night holds teeth, you don't sleep without your bottle of pins and hair. A traveler's hunger is like a drumbeat, steady, insistent, occasionally deafening. And in a world where taverns are rare, inns are expensive, and your last bowl of stew came with a complimentary beetle, it's what you carry in your pockets that keeps you going. You don't exactly pack a lunch in the medieval world. You carry a strategy. Right now, you're chewing a chunk of hard cheese that tastes like regret and salt. It came from a wheel you bought 2 villages ago, already crusty when you got it, now resembling a medieval hockey puck, but it lasts. That's the point. Nearby, a merchant unwraps something from cloth, smoked fish. The smell wafts over like a slap, but you're jealous anyway. The fish is oily, blackened at the edges, and stiff enough to hammer nails with, but it keeps. Smoke is the medieval fridge. Your own stash is modest. Bread, mostly. Hard, dry, and wrapped in linen. It's less a loaf than a weapon at this point. You break off a corner, dip it in a puddle of weak wine, and call it supper. Food on the go in medieval times wasn't about pleasure, it was survival math. How long can it last? Can it be eaten with dirty hands? Will it still be food after a week in a pouch? That's why dried peas were popular. Dried beans, lentils, anything you could cook over a fire or chew half raw if needed. Some people carried tiny bags of grain to toast on the fly. Others, ground flour mixed with lard and honey, pressed into cakes, and dried hard. Some called it travel biscuit. You call it edible brick. Historians still argue whether ordinary folks carried these food items regularly or only during longer journeys. The written records tend to focus on feasts and markets. But these practical travel foods often slip beneath the parchment radar. You once met a woman who carried a dried apple stuffed with cloves. It tasted like a spice shop having a panic attack, but she swore it kept illness away. You believed her just long enough to bite it. Big mistake. Another traveler shows you his meat stick, a salted sausage so dense it could double as a cudgel. He slices off a piece and offers it. It tastes like smoke and something vaguely furry, but you nod in thanks. Manners matter. Salted meat is king, of course. If you're rich, it's boar or venison. If you're not, it's whatever was unlucky enough to be caught near your house last winter. You once had squirrel jerky. You don't talk about it. One day you pass a group of mercenaries resting under a tree. Their fire crackles around a spit in it, a rabbit. Skinned, skewered, roasting slowly. One of them brushes it with a mystery paste. Maybe mustard, maybe crushed acorns. Could be both. They also carry flatbread in packs, stacked like sheets of stiff paper. One dunks a piece into rabbit fat and folds it around a sprig of onion grass. It smells amazing. He sees you watching and throws you a chunk. It hits your chest like a throne book. You eat it anyway. Others go simpler. A turnip, a raw onion. Some even chew roasted barley or roasted chestnuts, just for the energy. You once saw someone eating dried beet chips in slices laid in the sun until they curled like old leaves. You pass a couple with a baby, and the mother is spooning mashed lentils into the child's mouth, using her finger. The baby makes a face that suggests betrayal. Still, it swallows. And of course, there's always the backup plan. Foraging. You know which berries to eat, which to avoid. You've chewed on wild garlic, picked mushrooms while squinting suspiciously at their caps, and once sucked on birch bark for flavor. Not proud of that one. Occasionally, you meet someone with true food magic. A baker's apprentice with honey-soaked nuts wrapped in cloth. A traveling friar with an orange. Imported, precious, and smelling like heaven. You never forget that smell. But mostly, you eat like an animal with a backpack. Crusts, smoked ends, scraps. You carry a small tin of salt, a twist of herbs, a crumbly bit of cheese wrapped in beeswax cloth, and a wooden spoon so worn it's more toothpick than utensil. You don't even know what real fresh tastes like anymore. Only the memory of a plum once, stolen from a monastery orchard. You still think about it. Your bag rattles with crumbs, smells like cheesefoot, and contains enough calories to technically survive another week. It's not pretty, it's not fancy, but it works. You eat like someone who never assumes there'll be a next meal. Because in this world, that's the safest bet. The storm rolls in without warning, just a distant growl of thunder. A shift in the wind's mood, and suddenly, you're soaked. Rain stings your face, your cloak clings like a wet dog, and you feel like a soup ingredient. It's in moments like this you realize, medieval travelers didn't just carry food, tools, or charms. They carried weather defenses. You duck beneath a tree, dripping, and eye your satchel. Inside is your one salvation, a waxed linen cloth. It's stiff, smells faintly of bees, and unfolds into a poor man's rain cape. It doesn't stop the water so much as argue with it. You throw it over your shoulders and mutter a silent thank you to the tanner who sold it to you. He claimed it had only a small leak. You hope it's in the back. Nearby, another traveloguer, dry as a biscuit, leans under a rocky outcrop, calmly adjusting what looks like a rolled animal pelt strapped to his back. He nods and unrolls it with a practiced flick. It's a sheep fleece, cured and lined with thick wool. Smells like damp barn, but it works. Shelter on the go isn't a tent, not for most people. It's layers, multi-use fabrics, cloaks that double as blankets, sacks that become mats, tunics that, when soaked, weigh 5 pounds each. Historians still argue whether commoners truly carried shelter gear consistently, or whether they just relied on the landscape barns, trees, church porches, animal pens. But archaeological finds and surviving texts suggest many folks did indeed haul makeshift sleeping gear. You meet a woman traveling with 2 donkeys, both draped in oil-treated wool. She carries a bundle of reeds strapped with rope. "My mattress," she says, before tossing you a strip of oiled leather to sit on. It squishes. You try not to think about why another man carries what looks like half a tent, just a canvas sheet, no frame. He ties one corner to a tree, stakes the other to the ground, and curls up beneath it like a well-trained hedgehog. The rain taps steadily on the canvas like fingers drumming on a coffin. Comforting. Somehow some travelers go more elaborate. You meet a pilgrim with a staff carved to fit into 2 notches on a wooden board. He assembles it like a magician, hangs a cloth between the uprights, and presto, a private little lean-to. He even has a waxed flap to cover his boots. You hate him a little. Meanwhile, your neighbor under the tree is fashioning a hood from a piece of sackcloth. It works, barely. He tells you stories of monks who wear waterproof cowls made from layers of boiled wool. Smell terrible, he adds, but they keep the rain out, and everyone else. You shiver. Your waxed cloth is starting to give up. You fumble in your bag for your dry socks, but remember, there aren't any. Just the slightly less wet ones. The most valuable thing in your pack right now, a hunk of beeswax. You use it to recoat your cloth when the sun returns, rubbing it in with a warm rock until the surface shines faintly. It smells of honey and candle smoke to things you haven't enjoyed in weeks. As the storm passes, the camp starts to stir again. People emerge from under trees, brush off their cloaks, shake out mats, and curse with creativity. A group of laborers dry their tunics by a fire, holding them up like strange flags of surrender. A child laughs as water drips off the end of his nose. You find yourself smiling too. Misery loves company and rain makes everyone equal. Later that evening, you meet a traveler who shows you her fire kit. Not flint and steel, but a tightly wrapped bundle of dry tinder, sealed in wax cloth and kept inside a hollowed-out gourd. Inside, dry moss, birch bark, and a few pine cones. For when nothing else works, she says. You want fire. You carry fire. Another carries a pouch of ash and salt thrown over wet logs to coax a flame from soaked wood. You marvel at the ingenuity. You realize that in the medieval world, prepared doesn't mean comfortable. It means less miserable by nightfall. Everyone's damp, hungry, and huddled together under patchwork cloths. You drape your waxed linen over your legs, wring out your tunic, and try to remember what dry socks feel like. But the stars peek through the clouds. A fire crackles. Someone's drying a piece of flatbread on a stick. The smell of smoke mixes with wet wool and pine. It's not perfect, but it's survivable, and in the medieval world, that's more than enough. You wake up sore. Not just slept on a rock sore, no. Your dreamed-I-was-falling-and-woke-up-to-actual falling sore. Your back's damp, your boots are twisted off halfway, and someone's chicken tried to nest on your chest in the middle of the night. Still, you rise, stretch, groan like an old barn door, and reach for your kit, not your food, not your charms, not even your tools. No, today begins with a different kind of survival. Grooming, yes. Medieval hygiene was a flexible concept, but make no mistake, people tried. They didn't want to stink. They just had limited resources and even more limited water that wouldn't kill them slowly with parasites. You open your cloth wrap, revealing your personal care stash. A rag, a dull-edged scraper, a small tin of salt, and a blackened sliver of soap that smells faintly of tallow and sadness. Beside you, a merchant is plucking his beard with a bone tweezer. "Lice," he says, cheerfully. "Little monsters." He flicks something into the fire, and you silently pray it wasn't still alive. Hair was a battlefield. People carried combs, wooden horn, or bone designed with close teeth to remove both tangles and invaders. One traveler proudly shows you his folding comb, worn smooth from years of use. It's beautiful. It also smells like goat. Some carried fragrant herbs in little cloth bundles, lavender, rosemary, or mint. Not because they were fancy, but because they were desperate. Tuck one under your cap and hope the bugs find you slightly less appealing. Historians still argue whether personal hygiene varied more by class or location. But archaeological digs confirm that even peasants had combs, tweezers, and small grooming knives. They may not have bathed often, but they had standards. You head to the stream with your rag. Kneel and splash water on your face. It's cold, brutal, perfect. You rub at the grime behind your ears, scrape your nails clean with a twig, and spit into the reeds. Nearby, a woman crushes walnut shells and mixes them with Asher makeshift tooth powder. She dips her finger into the mix and rubs her teeth with rhythmic precision. She grins at you afterward, showing off teeth that are ... mostly there. Tooth care wasn't unheard of. Chewing on sticks, rinsing with vinegar or salt water, even scraping the tongue with the edge of a broken spoon, was all on the table. Medieval. Breath, still not ideal. But they cared. You unwrap a Lardon clay salve from your pouch and rub it onto the cracks in your knuckles. It stinks, but your skin drinks it like a parched field. A man beside you smears something darker behind his ears. Grease keeps the lice confused, he explains. You pretend that makes sense. There's also Kalantha, medieval version. Anyway, some carried small vials of rosewater or lavender oil. One friar insists he uses it to cleanse sin from the air. But you're pretty sure he just doesn't want to smell like cabbage again. Later, you see a woman heating a flat stone in the fire. She uses it to iron her valious iron with a rock. Then she spits on her fingers, smooths her eyebrows, and reapplies a faint dusting of crushed rose petals to her cheeks. For color, she says, so I don't look like death warmed over. You, on the other hand, rub ash under your eyes to keep the sun off. It's a look. Some carry tiny bronze mirrors, not polished to perfection, but good enough to see if your nose is bleeding. Others just borrow puddles. You've seen men slick their hair with leftover soup. You've seen women braid using spit. You've seen things. You pass a fellow with soot-streaked hands polishing his boots with a rag dipped in pig fat. They shine, somehow. Presentation matters, he says. You ask who he's trying to impress. The angels, he replies. You don't push further, but the effort, the intent, is everywhere. You even spot someone flossing. Yes, flossing with a horsehair thread. He yanks it through his teeth with grim determination, then proudly spits into the fire. The fire protests. As the morning continues, everyone shifts from survival to presentation. You wrap your rag around your neck, tuck your lard salve back in your pouch, and try not to breathe too deeply near the man with vinegar socks. Clean is relative. Groomed is subjective. But here, in this muddy, malodorous make-do world, people still care. Because even in the middle of the Dark Ages, nobody wants to be the smelliest person at the roadside fire. You pass through a foggy crossroads this morning, boots caked in yesterday's missteps, when a rhythmic clink behind you draws your attention. Turning, you spot a curious figure approaching. Armor that barely fits, a helmet tucked under one arm, and what looks like a cooking pot strapped to his back with rope. He grins as he catches up a self-proclaimed pilgrim knight. You raise an eyebrow, and he winks. Mostly pilgrim, a little knight, very hungry, and just like that. You're reminded of another category of medieval travel must-haves. Miscellaneous survival gadgets, the random, sometimes absurd, always multi-purpose items that people swore they couldn't live without. First off, the spoon. Nearly every traveler carries one, often on a string or tucked behind a belt. You've seen wooden ones, bone ones, even metal ones, if the owner's wealthy or lucky. The universal tool, they call it. For eating, for digging, for slapping. Rats. One woman claims hers once saved her from a mugging. She doesn't elaborate. Then there's the cup. Typically horn or wood, sometimes metal if someone died conveniently. They hang from belts like little trophies, stained with wine, broth, or whatever questionable liquid was offered last night. You pass a man who drinks rainwater straight from his cupped hat. Not ideal, but it works. Your own gear includes a flint, and steel wrapped in oilcloth, a wax-dipped rope wick, and a small whetstone you once traded for a roasted onion. No regrets. But it's what people add to their kits that truly baffles and delights. One merchant carries a tightly rolled parchment map not of roads, but of monasteries offering free food to pilgrims. It's annotated with circles, crosses, and ominous little skulls. "Don't sleep here," one reads. You don't ask why. A young couple hauls a portable spindle. Yes, for spinning wool. The girl spins as they walk. "Saves time," she says, and nerves. You notice the yarn is tied around her waist and looped through her partner's fingers like a leash. You meet a traveler with a three-legged stool, tied to his back. He says it was his grandfather's. Uses it as a seat, a weapon, and once, apparently, as a sled. He offers to show you. You decline. Some folks carry writing tools. Not common, but treasured. A charcoal stick, tucked in a hollow. Bone. Bits of parchment, sewn into a cloak lining. One man shows you his tally stick, notched with debts and promises. Each marks a favor, he says. You're not sure whether he's rich or doomed. Historians still argue whether these oddments were widespread or just a matter of personal eccentricity. But the scattered evidence travelogues, church records, even lost and found, list suggests medieval. Travelers were nothing if not inventive. You once saw a man using a flat rock as a plate, a whetstone, and a pillow all before noon. That same man used a chicken feather to clean his ears. You made a quiet decision never to share food with him again. Another woman carries a net, not for fishing, but for catching sleeping children who roll too far from the fire. She demonstrates by tying it between two logs and flopping into it. It looks surprisingly effective. One shepherd reveals a hollowed gourd containing string, dried beans, a single silver coin, and a carved St. Christopher medallion. Everything I own fits. Inside, he says. You ask why the beans. Rattlesnakes, he answers. Then smiles. There are no rattlesnakes here. You walk a bit with a musician, his only possession, a hurdy-gurdy strapped across his back. He plays a droning tune as he strolls, and the sound follows you like a confused swarm of bees. People throw him coins. One man throws a radish. He accepts both. Then there's the jester. Yes, really. A wandering fool with bells on his sleeves, a puppet in his pocket, and riddles for sale. His kit includes colored chalk, a wooden flute, and a pouch of dried peas he uses to guess people's weight for a laugh. He's terrible at it, but you laugh anyway. Not all gadgets are practical. Some are sentimental. A piece of broken pottery, a dried flower pressed between scraps of cloth, a twist of string once used to tie a love letter. People carry history in fragments. You realize then travel kits aren't just about survival. They're about identity. What you carry says who you are, where you've been, and what you hope won't go wrong. Your own pouch clinks with flint, thuds with stale bread, and crinkles with parchment corners. But tucked deep inside is a smooth river stone, pointless, heavy, and comforting. You found it in your first week on the road. It's been with you ever since. As night falls and the fire crackles, the pilgrim knight pulls out his pot knot, for soup, but for boiling his socks. The smell is biblical. You retreat politely, but as you lie down under the stars, wrapped in your cloak, spoon tucked into your belt, like a knight's dagger, you can't help but smile. Everyone's kit is weird, but weird is what gets you through. There's a sound you've come to associate with early morning in medieval Europe: hooves on hard-packed dirt, wheels groaning under weight, and the shuffling thud of yet another stranger's bundle landing near the fire. Trade is constant. Movement is constant. And with that movement comes something that's less about survival and more about surviving other people. Barter gear. You see it unfold like theater. A traveling mason squats beside a tinsmith. No words at first, just a slow unveiling. The mason sets down a chisel, well used but sharp. The tinsmith counteroffers with a loop of wire, polished and bent like a question mark. Back and forth they go. It's not about currency. It's about equivalence. And it's why travelers, especially those smart enough to stay fed and dry always, carry one thing more: tradables. You've got a bundle of your own, hidden in the folds of your bag. A few extra buttons made of carved horn, 2 small iron nails, a sliver of beeswax, and the real treasure, a needle with a slightly bent point. It doesn't sound like much, but out here, where everything is in motion and nothing is guaranteed, these objects are as good as gold. You once traded half a dried pear for a leather strap. Another time, you swapped a pinch of thyme for a bowl of lentil soup and, honestly, came out ahead. People carry mini-wealth. Things light enough to stash, useful enough to tempt, and rare enough to command attention. One man shows off his travel coin, not money, but a polished token stamped with a sunburst. "Bought me shelter twice," he says. You suspect it's a good luck charm disguised as currency. Doesn't matter. It worked. Another trader carries pigment's little paper, twists filled with crushed minerals for artists, he says. Or maybe alchemists. Or maybe just gullible nobility. But he always trades them. You come across a widow with an entire sash stitched with shiny objects. Fish hooks, tiny bells, buttons, glass beads. Her daughter's eyes shine when she adds another bead, gifted by a baker in exchange for a riddle. Historians still argue whether most barter involved crafted goods or shared labor. Some say services like shoe repair or childbirth aid were far more commonly exchanged than physical goods. But from the road, you know both matter. One elderly man, you meet, carries dozens of bone needles and offers simple stitches in exchange for travel tips. He mends your torn hem, then marks your route on a bit of bark using soot and spit. You thank him with a bit of cloth dipped in vinegar. He grins like you handed him a crown, and there's strategy to it. You notice experienced travelers keep their tradables separate. Some hide them in their shoes. Others stitch them into cloaks. One even keeps her items in a hollowed-out bread crust dry, discreet, and edible in a pinch. Genius. You've seen knives traded for firewood, combs for gossip, fish hooks for bandages. A young lad once bartered a single copper coin for a store. Ended up with 2 eggs and a bruised ego. He's still telling that story. Sometimes, the value isn't in what's offered, but how it's pitched. One man sells blessed rosemary sprigs, tied with red thread. He charges double, claims they ward off toothaches. People believe him. He might believe it himself. There are darker trades, too. Behind the barn, a cloaked figure barters a strip of dried mushrooms for something wrapped in cloth. The exchange is quick, no eye contact. You don't ask. Then, there are emergency swaps. A merchant with a broken wheel begs a passing smith for help. Offers a whole sack of dried figs in return. "Take them," he pleads. "I can't chew them anyway." The smith agrees. The cart rolls again. Your favorite barter. A flute carved from bone, traded for a cracked mirror. Not because of the items, but because they made each other smile. These exchanges aren't just economics. They're social glue. The medieval world is full of risk storms, sickness, strangers, but trade. Trade creates bonds, trust, obligation, sometimes even friendship. As you settle in for the night, a girl sits beside you and offers half a pickled turnip. In return, you give her a twist of dried apple skin you've been saving for weeks. It's a terrible trade, but her laugh is worth it. And in the silence that follows, punctuated only by crackling fire and gentle snoring, you feel a little richer. You wake to a smell that could charitably be described as mystery meat meets wet sheep. Someone's cooking breakfast, or attempting to, over a sputtering flame. You shift in your half-damp cloak, stretch until your back pops like old wood, and think, today might be the day my boots finally fall apart. Which brings you to a cruel, medieval truth. even when you're not hungry, soaked, or slightly hexter, still at war with your own clothing. Medieval people didn't just wear their clothes, they lived in them, slept in them, walked across kingdoms in them, and, most of the time, they had to repair them on the fly. You start rummaging through your satchel and pull out your so-called clothing kit, a bone needle, a few short lengths of coarse thread, a square of leather, and your prized possession, a thimble fashioned from a flattened spoon bowl. It only sort of fits your finger, but it does the job. Your tunic has a rip under the arm from a thorn bush 3 days ago. You stab the needle through the wool, then immediately stab your thumb, again, for the 5th time this week, nearby. A woman is rehemming her skirt, using what looks like horsehair. She's threading it through a cracked bodkin with fingers like tree roots. You watch in awe as she knots it with her teeth. Only thing that lasts, she shrugs. You believe her. You've seen others sewing with sinew-actual animal tendon. It's stronger than thread, waterproof, and deeply unsettling to watch someone pull it through cloth with a wet schlub. A cobbler passing through once offered to resole your boots for a coin. You handed him a dried fish and a smile. He laughed, declined, and gave you a square of boiled leather instead. You've been limping a bit ever since. Footwear's a constant problem. Most people walk. A lot. And shoes, such as they are, weren't built for comfort. They're stitched leather, thin-soled, sometimes wrapped in cloth, and rarely symmetrical. You once tried swapping your left and right boots for fun. It made no difference. Historians still argue whether most peasants even owned proper footwear, or if many traveled barefoot, unless snow or social status demanded otherwise. But the archaeological record? Lots of shoe parts. Lots of patches. Lots of desperate improvisation. One traveling priest you met had sandals reinforced with wooden inserts, tied on with goat gut. Another stitched bits of metal into the soles, like cleats. He clanked like a haunted cupboard, but swore he could scale any hill. And then there's the layering. Medieval travelers didn't exactly pack wardrobes. They wore layers, wool tunics, linen undergarments, cloaks heavy enough to qualify as roommates. These layers absorbed sweat, deflected rain, caught fleas, and shielded against windall, while being nearly impossible to clean. You once spent an entire day with a pebble caught in your trousers. You couldn't take them off without starting an international incident, so you just limped in angry silence. That pebble still haunts you. Some carry spare laces, little bone toggles, even bits of dyed thread for emergency repairs. Others rely on pins used, to close cloaks, hold hats, or seal rips when needle and thread aren't an option. One young man you pass has 4 holding his trousers together. You nod in solidarity. Fasteners were valuable. You've traded for a single bronze pin before used it to hold up your bag and stitch together a sleeve hole. That pin saw more action than most nights. A girl in one caravan has buttons made from nutshells. Her friend's cloak is held together with a loop of twisted grass. Another traveler uses a fishhook as a brooch. You don't ask. Everyone's got their own tricks. One merchant has a pouch of beeswax mixed with pine resin. He rubs it into seams to waterproof them. A tailor carries a scrap of parchment with 10 different stitches diagrammed. For the apprentices, he says. Then offers to teach you for a dried plum. You've seen leggings patched with saddle leather, capes stitched from flour sacks, and undergarments made of repurposed tent cloth. Creativity thrives when dignity is optional, and every now and then someone shines. A woman rides past in a tunic dyed a deep blue fastened with polished bone clasps. Her boots are stitched with green thread, her gloves are lined with fur. She looks down at you, nods politely, and vanishes in a cloud of lavender and superiority. You look down at your tunic. It's mostly intact. One sleeve's longer than the other. The hem's been repaired with red thread because that's all. You smell like fire, smoke, and ambition. But the truth, you're proud of your gear, because every stitch tells a story. Every mismatched patch is a mile walked. Every snag, a moment survived. And in this world, function isn't just fashion. Freedom. You're walking again because, let's face it, in medieval Europe, you're always walking. But this time it's different. This time, the destination is in sight. A town. A real one. With gates, and smoke curling from rooftops, and what looks like a small market forming near a church square. You stop on a ridge and let your body sigh. Your knees creak like ship timbers. Your pack groans with the weight of food scraps, waxy cloths, buttons, bone needles, odd socks, salted cheese, and that one oddly sentimental riverstone. You take a moment to think, how did I make it? Truth is, you made it the way everyone did. One weird item at a time. Before heading into town, you pass a group of travelers resting under a grove of yew trees. One of them, a gray-bearded man with skin like parchment, invites you to sit. He's laying out his belongings on a wool blanket like a priest arranging relics. You recognize some, the usual spoon, the comb, the rolled-up cloak. But there are stranger things too. A bone whistle, a tiny woven doll, a pouch of bright pebbles, a carved wooden dice set. He looks up, grinning. "Show me yours," he says. So you do. You unroll your own chaos. Bits of waxed thread, the saint's token you found in a ditch, your patched-up knife, a bit of dried thyme, a knotted charm, a fat bundle that still smells like last week's rain. You both laugh. It's a language of survival. Around you, others are doing the same. A girl is boiling something in a battered tin cup, turns out it's dye for repairing her faded tunic trim. A man oils his boots with what smells suspiciously like goose fat. A child wears a necklace made of chicken bones and old buttons, and walks around offering curses for 1 copper coin. He's making a fortune. These aren't random oddities. They're stories, tools, crutches, symbols of persistence. Historians still argue whether such traveling kits were common across regions, or unique to wanderers, outlaws, and pilgrims. But in your aching bones and worn hands, you carry the truth. Everyone had their version of this kit, whether visible or hidden in the folds of a cloak. You remember the monk who used a shoehorn carved from antler, the mercenary who cleaned his sword with ashes and a strip of wool, the old woman who kept a tiny bell in her pocket and rang it each time she passed a crossroads to keep the dead from following. You remember the crushed flowers used as perfume, the coin hidden in a heel, the rag smeared with vinegar to keep flies away. Even now, as you step into the edges of town, you pass a boy with a slingshot carved from a forked stick, a tanner carrying a bottle of bear fat to trade, a baker tying herbs over his stall, not for cooking, for luck. This place hums with oddities, with items not found in books or inventories, but found in pockets, in pouches, in lives. So when you finally settle near a well, loosen your pack, and stretch your feet under a wooden bench, you do so knowing you didn't just carry objects. You carried medieval reality. The stuff people clung to when logic failed. The strange, the sacred, the surprisingly effective. A folded rag soaked in vinegar. A chicken bone with a name. A rock that reminded you of home. It wasn't about being prepared for everything. It was about being prepared for something. And now that you've arrived, now that you've survived, boots cracked, shoulders sore, mind buzzing, you realize something even stranger. You kind of missed the road already, because out there, with your mismatched tools, weird pouches, itchy socks, an ever-hungry stomach, you weren't just surviving, you were participating in the weirdest, rawest version of life. And it was glorious. Now, the town lights flicker faintly as the sun finally dips beyond the stone chimneys. The noise of haggling, of wheels clacking over cobblestones, of roosters squabbling, and children laughing, all of it softens, fading like a fading dream. You settle in a quiet corner of the square, tucked under the eave of a shop closed for the night. The stone wall behind you is warm from the day's heat. Your cloak a little less scratchy now that you've shifted it just right. Your pack, now half empty and twice as cherished, rests at your side. You run your fingers along the stitching of your tunic, pausing where the red thread held together that thorn-ripped seam. You remember fixing it under the stars. You remember every moment that left a mark on it. The air cools. You pull the hood of your cloak over your brow. Far off, a church bell chimes once, just once. You smile. No alarms, no wolves, just peace. You breathe. You remember the smells of peat fires, of leather soaked in rain, of onions frying in a stranger's pan. You remember the ache of the road, the comfort of a shared spoon. The sound of someone you'll never see again, wishing you luck. And now you're here, still whole, still curious, still carrying stories, that weigh nothing and everything. So close your eyes. Let the footsteps grow quieter. Let the flickering torchlight fade. You've arrived, and whatever comes tomorrow, you've got your kit, you've got your wits, and you've earned your rest.